use detergent because they didn't rinse out their container well enough before they collected the urine. Especially on a routine UA and you might be bringing it from home and you don't have any kind of sterile container. Okay, and let me get the books turned to the chemical so that we can refer to them. So we'll try to pick out the key stuff. So I want to get each one turned to the chemical that if I want to refer to them, I have them both ready. So now we got to talk a little bit about the dipsticks. There's things you shouldn't do that will cause inaccurate results just because you handled it improperly. Okay. If I gave you a scenario, in fact, the scenario, because last year we got further than you guys we've gotten on test one, and one of the questions I had, they had put all the strips out that they're going to test on their like 10 urines and let them sit there out of the bottle, even if they put it on a paper towel or something. You don't, even ideally how we're doing them, put in those little tubes, isn't an ideal way because it's not a darkened container. But we found if we put the new strips in the old bottles, they were turning all the glucoside pads to positive. Okay? So ideally, you want to use one strip at a time as you're getting it out. Not get all your strips out, lay it on the counter, and then go, go, go. Keep the bottle open for that time frame, like if you were dipping 10 urines back there, but one at a time. And try not to touch the pads. So the pads, and they usually have a desiccant or a desiccator in the bottle that prevents moisture from building up because that can cause the pads to turn color. It would be too costly to spend $50 per bottle and have each of you have 13 bottles. That's why we pull from one and then go open a new one and pull from another per class. So it works for teaching purposes, but ideally you wouldn't do that if you are working just one at a time out of the bottle and keep it tightly shut when you're done. And they're always kept at room temp, and we know in the real world nothing is used past expiration date. But we found in the teaching world there is a lot of stuff that still works past the expiration date. But CAP will be a big deficiency if they come in and you have anything not expired or not labeled. One time they came and inspected us, and we had our 4 gram stain reagents out in the tray. The one they picked up was, I think, the safranin. It had no label when it was open or when it expired. And that was the only reagent she picked up in the whole room, and it was the one that didn't have that label on it. So labeling is important for people to follow. Especially if you have troubleshooting problems, if there's something that's not working, you know, like for me, when I was trying to get the 2 other chem strip analyzers working, I had to, okay, I'm going to take off the cord off this one, put it on the next one. Okay, the paper's not printing, so I had to switch out the paper to get thermal labeled. You just have to think, okay, what do I do next to try to solve the problem? The other thing, don't go touching the pads. It has that plastic in for a reason. And I think everybody's pretty good about dipping it, rimming as you come out. Get that excess off because there is run over. If you just let that and never rimmed it off and you let it lay there like, you know, didn't care that it wasn't the time to lay it on the machine or you had dipped it too soon for your time, run over can affect them. So always rim it as you come out. I know the stated times are tough when you're trying to read 5 of them at 60 seconds, but the ones you worry about, the ones that are abnormal. So the more you do something that you get to understand what is abnormal, the more you do something you just kind of know, uh-oh, that color's abnormal. Those are the ones you want to read for sure at 60 seconds because they'll get worse the longer it passes 60 seconds. Anything that's normal is going to stay normal. That's why don't sweat anything negative. just move on to what needs a number and what is abnormal when you're doing it manually. Anything that doesn't match the color, if there's a way to confirm it, we've learned 4 chemical tests. Next week we're going to learn the microscopic confirming. Blood you can confirm under the microscope. Leukocyte esterase, you should look for white cells under the microscope. Nitrite, you should look for bacteria under the microscope. So now we're going to add more confirmatory tests with the microscope. And the controls, those controls, that was something on the test that I didn't grade as hard because that and renal threshold, those 2 things, the controls are done to make sure the test system is accurate. Not just only for that dipstick, you're looking at the whole test system of that. If you're using an automated analyzer or you're doing it manually, you're saying when your controls work, everything is working well. The machine was maintained well and cleaned well and it calibrated well. The QC worked, that means everything you did to set up that test environment was good. Not just that little dipstick. So you're going to have a lot of different tests out there done manually or through an analyzer. That whole testing system is done accurately and you can trust the results. And then I should have, but it was okay. I think what was the abnormal on level 3 was the specific gravity. I think if anybody had that circled, it was because the paper said 10 and it was 1.005 for a lot of people. So that one didn't read poorly, but I think on the level 1, a lot of people had 5 or negative for ketones, and it should have been, I think, 50 to 150, and one other one was a little lower. I think there was 2 that was commonly circled on the level 1. Ideally, you're not doing any testing if those controls are circled in the real world. What I should have did is adjust the ranges before we started. When I ran the first day, I should have adjusted my ranges, and then maybe there would have been fewer things circled. Because anytime you're using an expired control, the ranges may not be as valid as they were when it was in date. And heme, you found you did 3 controls. UA, you did 2 controls. Chemistry, you're going to do usually 2 controls. But heme, you have people that are low, people who are normal, and people who are high on their results. So you'll have 3 ranges for heme, but you minimally have 2. Okay, the pH. Overall, pH is not going to be a big indicator of pathology. I put 2, but truly, if normal range, some books goes 4 to 8, some books goes 4.5 to 8. How are you going to ever tell a diabetic went even lower when it normal ranges can be under 5 to 8? But they say someone who is true, and Nicole, can you remember, since on your dad's, did he have a 5 pH or he was still 6.5?
I think it was like 6.5.
And hers would have put a perfect case. I would have expected his, if it's truly acidic, diabetics become more acidic, I would have thought her dad with 1,000 milligrams spilled over into the urine would have been down at the low end like a 5. And that didn't even pan out. And it's twice he had that when you brought it in. UTI, though, is a good one. So the only pathological one on so you're going to put pH. Under that, put in parentheses 4.5 to 8, since I didn't say normal as a column. Just in parentheses, put 4.5 to 8. We're just going to put pathologically on a fresh urine 8, an alkaline pH, so pH greater than 7. So the reaction, they call it a double buffer system. You're gonna have to know the 2 indicators. Methyl red is an indicator on that pad that shows the acid range, anything below 7. Bromthiamyl blue, so if you think basic, BB, bromthiamyl blue is the basic or alkaline, anything above 7. So all I want you to know as the reaction for pH, I want bromthiamyl blue and methyl red. And you might want to put next to methyl red, less than 7 pH it detects and will indicate, and bromthiamyl blue will be greater than 7. It'll indicate the alkaline one. And I don't care if anybody else writes their own little chart too, but this one, I know, you know, there'll be better handwriting than myself, and I'll copy it for you before you leave. The disease we're only going to associate, we're going to just pick the one that's alkaline on a fresh urine, and we're going to go with a UTI. Because the bacteria, as they multiply, they end up making the pH more basic or alkaline. And that is a good indicator that you might have a UTI if it's a fresh urine. So we already know it might be yellow, but you should see cloudy. Like in your case, Tiana, you had cloudy. Did your pH ever go alkaline?
Mine was 5.
Which is, well, we'll see when we do yours under the microscope what we see under there.
Did you want me to put alkaline or just UTI?
Put UTI greater than 7 pH. So you got to know that that's alkaline, right? You're okay if we say greater than 7? You know that's alkaline. And so, this is from which book? Probably Strassinger. I think they had some really good charts. So, Barb is going to get into detail on respiratory and metabolic acidosis and respiratory or metabolic alkalosis. When it becomes acidic and when it becomes alkaline. You're going to have a whole lecture series on acid-base balance with her. Okay? Sometimes you might have pH changes if there's defects in tubular secretion and reabsorption. Renal calculi, the same name for kidney stones. You might have change in pH. 5 would be what you want to circle. The normal everyday tech is going to have more involvement of suspecting a UTI from their urines because of pH than anything on an everyday tech normally. Crystals, you're going to see when we get into the microscopic lecture why pH helps you. Every time I give you a slide test and it's this crystal I want you to identify, I give you the pH. Because we're going to learn crystals that precipitate out when it's an acid pH and crystals that precipitate out when your pH is an alkaline. Naturally, we're going to see more acid crystals normally than alkaline because a lot of us don't walk around with alkaline pHs. So that would be the secondary one I would circle on your PowerPoint or star. It is a big factor in deciding what crystal you have when you're reporting it to the physician. Most of the crystals are non-pathological. They're just dissolved solids that precipitate out. But there are some pathological ones we'll highlight, and the pathological ones are usually an acid pH. So pH is a very big clue when you're identifying what the crystal is under the scope. And 7 is the third one I want you to highlight. In the book, it states that if you ever get a pH of 9, it's usually an unacceptable specimen. You want to recollect. So put example of pH of 9, unacceptable, recollect. But most of us, the pH is going to be a big help when we're assessing someone who has a UTI on our everyday everyday urinalysis on people. Okay, this is where we want a false negative where it's decreased. So if you see it, the analyte is decreased, that could be a false negative. If the analyte is increased, that could be a false positive. So you'll see it written a couple different ways. A false decrease of pH would be run over. Protein has this method called protein error of indicators. And it has a pH that is constant in the pad for it, and it's at a pretty low pH. If it sits, you didn't rim your urine very well, and it pools and runs over into the pad preceding it, it can affect the pH. So a false negative or lowering, so negative means the pH lowered, would be acid runover from protein, which is the square next to it. A false elevated be, why would, if you leave it at room temp, could the pH increase? What could be present there that would cause the pH to increase if you let it sit
Bacteria.
out at room temp?
Bacteria.
Did someone say bacteria? I can't hardly hear. Bacteria, if there's any in the urine and you set it out at room temp and the bacteria multiply, it could cause a falsely elevated pH, and it was because you didn't run them properly and didn't run it within the hour. And this is just an example. People who eat a lot of meat might have a more acidic pH. People who eat a lot of vegetables might have a more alkaline, but they're nothing pathological.
Is there a confirmatory test for pH?
Confirmatory test, no. So put NA. Protein, and I'll see if I can read how they explain protein error of indicators. What I'm gonna have you know is one of the indicators, I'm not gonna, what it's saying is if there's protein, the indicator in the pad acts differently if there's protein present in the urine, and I'll read what the book says. One of the indicators in the pad for protein is what I want you to know for the test. It's called tetrabromophenols blue.
Is that what you want me to put for reaction?
Yep, because that's the indicator. And let me read how the book explains. It says, traditional reagent strip use the principle of the protein error of indicators. Contrary to the general belief that indicators produce specific colors in response to a particular pH, certain indicators change color in the presence of protein even though they have a constant pH in the pad. So all you have to know for me is this is the indicator as the reaction for the protein. That will detect what protein is present in there. So I'm going to try to keep it to one key word for all of them if possible. And as far as pathological, and we're talking not just trace or negative protein, or 30, yes,
You said the tetrabromophene blue.
is the indicator.
But
We're
it
gonna
indicates the specific protein.
amount of protein. It just
Amount.
detects, and the main protein, this is something you do need to know, if albumin is the specific protein primarily detected on that dipstick. Because there's a couple things we're going to talk about that are other proteins that are pathological that your dipstick won't detect. And the physician has to be smart enough to figure out, hey, they could have another protein that's bad. There's a couple of them bad. And then the disease, all you're going to put is general kidney disease. We're not going to specify which one, but it's not just low levels of protein. You have to be, maybe in parentheses, put kidney disease, and underneath kidney disease, put greater than 100 milligrams per deciliter. So if you reported a 30, they're not going to say, oh, I bet they have kidney
Is
disease.
it 100 milligrams?
100. Put greater than. So at least, I think that is your 2+, the 100, if I'm not mistaken, on your dipstick. Specifically, you're going to have to add other things than protein. And we will start adding as we get to the microscopic. If we have a disease called acute glomerulonephritis, we're going to have the high protein, but then when we go to the microscope, we're going to see blood and a thing called red cell cast. When we have a disease called pyelonephritis, which is it's an actual kidney infection, not a bladder infection, we're going to see the high protein, but then we're going to see white cells and white cell cast. So kidney disease, a high level of protein is a red flag to the physician. hey, there's something going on with the kidney, but it doesn't give them specifics. It just is an indicator for you. You better investigate and look at the whole process. This is something Strassinger does better than Graf. I want you to know an example of pre-renal, renal, and post-renal. And this is not, this you just write on your PowerPoint. Because you can have protein spill in your urine and it doesn't have anything to do with the kidney. An example is pre-renal. Some people, did you talk at all about multiple myeloma or macroglobulinemia with plasma dyscrasias in hematology? You should hear it in serology and with me. Pre-renal, there's a thing called multiple myeloma. And it produces a protein called Bence-Jones. And it is an example that might not show up at all on your dipstick. Another one, let's give you a second one just in case, because it doesn't have always in hand with it, albumin. If you had a hemolytic anemia, one of them you discussed, what makes up your red cells and white cells and anything is going to be your cells? Protein. If you have them lysing, it makes sense that you're going to have elevated protein, right? Because proteins make up your cells. So that might be one you understand a little better because intravascular hemolysis has nothing to do with your kidneys. Like a warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia, a cold hemolytic anemia. I think you probably talked about paroxysmal, nocturia. These are pre-renal, okay? It has nothing to do with your kidneys being a problem. So think, kidney is normal. So the protein is spilling over because something's secondary, okay? Renal is a true kidney disease. Something is wrong with the glomerulus or the tubules. So this is not something going on the chart. We're gonna actually pick a renal one to put on the chart. And then post-renal, a perfect one is a cystitis. Anybody know what a cystitis is?
Inflammation of a...
So it's
Cyst?
a bladder infection. It is not a kidney infection. So the bladder is post-renal. It has nothing to do with the kidney. So renal has to do with the kidney. So if you distinguish them, this is the actual kidney is a problem. These are both, oh, are you guys in here? Are you, oh, you guys get to be in the lab.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
See you later.
Can trauma be renal as well?
Trauma, it depends. If it's trauma outside of the kidney, that wouldn't be renal. But if the kidney was actually damaged, that could be. But if it was some areas outside that showed blood in,
Back injury or.
that is still, that's still not renal or the kidney. Think of renal, it has to be something of the kidney. So on the disease state, we're gonna do an actual kidney problem, okay? Which you do probably have just kidney disease down.
You put general kidney disease.
But underneath that, put renal. If it's a UTI, some people with all the bacteria in the white cells will have protein on their dipstick. But is that a kidney problem? No, unless it's up into a kidney called the pyelonephritis. If it's a cystitis, a bladder infection, it is post-renal. The kidney is normal. Bence-Jones is something you're going to need to know a little bit about because that comes up on the registry often. But Strassinger is better at getting a little bit more detailed than Graf. So we're going to go with the renal, which is the kidney is the problem. But there are other reasons protein is in your urine and it doesn't mean your kidneys has something going on. And if the kidney shows that it's normal, the doctor has to investigate. What are other causes spilling protein in the urine? Some of us have a thing, and you need to know this term. Who knows what orthostatic proteinuria means?
Join.
Okay, so I'm laying in bed all night and I did a urine as soon as I got up, it'll be negative for protein. I get up, go to my job, go to school, whatever, I do my urine, and now I have protein, trace to 30 in my urine. They call that orthostatic proteinuria. Nothing is wrong with you. Some people spill some protein the more up and about in activity they do. That's a term you need to be aware of. It is nothing pathological. This is a key slide. I would star them, and Strassenger was the only one who put them in this chapter. Did you talk about at all microalbuminuria with Barb? In chemistry, the physician can suspect that the patient has gone into diabetic nephropathy because diabetics untreated can have kidney problems, vascular problems with circulation, and eyesight problems. Okay, and my nephew has 2 of those 3 things going on at age 40. There's a test the physician can order, and usually you have to have a machine that does specifically microalbumins. It's not going to be detected on a routine UA dipstick. I want you to know this goes with diabetic nephropathy. So that means that diabetic is starting to have kidney problems. Pathology of the nephron, that is not good. So just if you can relate, microalbumin positive goes with diabetic nephropathy. So diabetic is having kidney problems. And it won't be detected. The other one I want you to know, and you need to know when it dissolves and when it precipitates. That's why it's kind of underlined in there. If the doctor suspects you have a plasma cell dyscrasia, you have an overproduction of plasma cells, and in those 2 diseases, macroglobulinemia, and I think you might even do protein electrophoresis with Barb, and you'll see the gamma region in lecture. Then in serology, Diane will hit on just the gamma region for multiple myeloma and macroglobulinemia. There's a test. If the doctor suspects you have this disease, it won't always show up on the urine dipstick as protein. He'll order the screening test. And you got to know this for me. They'll say, I want you to take that urine, I want you to boil it. The Bence-Jones proteins, when Diane teaches you the structure of the antibody, does anybody know the domain of an antibody structure? You have IgG, A, M, and E, and D. I don't know, from anatomy. There is a heavy chain, which is how you get your name, gamma, mu, epsilon, alpha. There's also light chains. There's kappa and lambda. So you should get that taught in serology by Diane. The light chains are called Bence-Jones protein. People with multiple myeloma can sometimes not have excessive full antibodies, but these light chains are excessive, and they're called Bence-Jones protein. So this is a key indicator. I always call it MM, multiple myeloma. And this test is an easy one to pinpoint them. So you take your urine, you boil it, and the protein precipitates out. So you have a thermometer as it's boiling. The protein precipitates out at 40 to 60 degrees. And then you keep boiling at 100 degrees, it goes back into solution. So a key question in my test and on the registry, when does someone with multiple myeloma, the Bence-Jones, precipitate out? And you got to know, 40 to 60 degrees. And it dissolves again at 100 at boiling. So that's when it precipitates out. So this one you got to goes, and remember, these might not be detected with your dipstick, but they're pathological proteins that the doctor better be aware. If they have problems and it's not showing on the dipstick, they better look at other things like diabetic nephropathy. They're going to know if they're diabetic, and if they maybe have a plasma cell dyscrasia. So you got to know those 2 points. And a false positive, an old urine, it'll get more alkaline. So put urine, a false negative, no, a false positive, we'll say urine sat too long. And then a false negative, put it's a protein other than albumin. And this is a perfect example, the microalbumin and the Benz-Jones protein. Put protein other than albumin, and beneath it, put Benz-Jones as an example. And then I give you an example of a pre-renal, a renal, and a post-renal, okay? And we talked about, oh, and confirming, you know the confirming.
Roberts.
And put 3% SSA. 3%, we're going to just call it 3% SSA. That's how it's usually written. Sulfosalicylic acid. But she's going to just write 3% SSA. And at the end of this PowerPoint, I show you a picture of one in the back of it. Glucose. Glucose is a little tricky, so leave yourself some room on glucose. Glucose, it has glucose oxidase as its reaction. So on the test, I'd probably put oxidase. We're going to say peroxidase is also in hemoglobin with blood. We're just going to put oxidase because I don't want to give you the hint of glucose, so I'm just going to put oxidase. But it's glucose oxidase. And it is on the dipstick. And flag on this slide, the dipstick only detects glucose, because then when we get to the confirming test, you can tell me what it does. And I would highlight that renal threshold. You're going to get that again. You got to know the renal threshold is 160 to 180. It has nothing to do with the less than 70,000 molecular weight and glucose spills over. The reason the renal threshold is important with glucose, you have a level your blood can only hold. When it becomes saturated, it spills over. It forces it out. It doesn't care how big it is.
And we put diabetes mellitus for
The disease, yep, diabetes mellitus. And then these are other choices on this slide, but mellitus is your big one. A false positive, this would be, just put a detergent. A false positive, and a false negative, put ascorbic acid. And on the first time you put it, put parentheses vitamin C. If you ever are in doubt of what to put for a false positive and false negative, and I'm going to make that a matching, go for a detergent for a false positive. They didn't rinse out the cleaning solution well enough. Or put ascorbic acid for a false negative. And some of them you'll get it right just because they're common. And the confirmatory test you know as the Clinitest, but it has a different reaction. You gotta put under the confirmatory test on this one, underneath it put copper reduction, so put RED apostrophe N, copper reduction, and then beneath that put Benedict's, D apostrophe N. So that will be reduction. Benedict's, because they don't have glucose oxidase in that tablet. And they will refer to it in both books, the copper reduction test or the Benedict's test. They're one and the same. And tell me what you would see. I have a lactose intolerance. What you're going to see, I'm 2 years old and I have a lactose intolerance. What are you going to see? You tested my urine.
Decrease?
Glucose is going to be positive when it only detects glucose, and I have a lactose intolerance.
No.
Glucose is negative. What are you going to see on the Clinitest? Because our lab tests every pediatric urine. It'll be positive because it does other sugars, not just glucose, and reducing substances, but usually it's an intolerance. That's something you got to know for your test, how you can get a negative glucose on the dipstick in a positive Clinitest. And that's a perfect case. Kids with, and then you tell me, what is this term called? And I'd write it underneath your slide. You just had it on your test under extra credit. pass-through phenomenon. Why do you gotta do 2 drops of urine versus 5? What happened when you did the confirmatory test?
Goes up and back down.
Went orange and it came back to the green. So it made it look like it didn't have a lot of sugar in it when you missed it going to the orange. All you do is instead of doing 5 drops to 10 drops of water, you do 2 drops of urine to 10. And then it should read truly. So you gotta know that. You gotta know that for real, not just as a bonus this time. Because that's something you're gonna get tested for me and the registry. I think all of this. This is the example, if you want to circle this that I just asked you, the lactose issue. Circle that so it reminds you for a test.
And you said that the lactose on the
Clinitest does any sugar.
any sugar. Okay.
The dipstick and remember they have different reactions, so you should think, hey, the Clinitest wasn't the oxidase, but it was the copper reduction and the Benedict. So that's a little clue too that's not going to test for the same thing. Okay, ketones. All I want you to write as the reaction is nitroprusside, and the acid test has that same reagent in it. Okay? And what do we already know? And you got to know the 3 ketones. Circle that. Because even if it's not on the study guide, the PowerPoint is fair game too. So if I tell you to circle something or highlight it, go back to your PowerPoint when you study. They're acetone. I don't know how you can remember them. You just got to think of them of maybe acetone, acetoacetic acid, and the long one is beta-hydroxybutyric acid. US Tech should know the 3 levels of ketones that are produced. And it's usually on diets that eliminate carbohydrates, so that's not anything pathological for the person. They're purposely doing that. Or it's a diabetic who's not controlled, which I've been impressed that Nicole's dad's hasn't had ketones, because that's a lot of sugar in his urine.
So you don't make the
Diabetes
diabetes mellitus.
mellitus. But what if I had the flu and I was throwing up? What do you think I'd show in my urine? Ketones. You can't keep anything down. You're going to start metabolizing your fats incompletely because you can't keep any food down. Yes?
They also use it as an extra confirmatory for anorexia and bulimia.
Which doesn't surprise me. Those poor people, I mean, that's our society. You're not good enough unless you're thin and beautiful. The normal average person is nothing in our society. And so those are tough. They're a big mental issue. You can tell them, you look fine, and all they see is big. My little sister had major trouble with that at high school. And we started seeing throw up on the toilet. Here my mom dies when she's 17 and I'm 25. And here we're going to these workshops. It was scary. And it's mentally in your head how you feel about you. And that you can die from. There was a girl, that lady at the health club, she was a nurse and her daughter was like 30. She got married, everything was fine, and she struggled with it all her 20s and she died. They couldn't control it and she ended up dying. And it was so sad, to think, oh my gosh, her mom was a nurse, everything, and here's this young girl married. Luckily she hadn't had any kids or anything that she left, and she died from it. So it is scary. But yes, vomiting, anorexia, bulimia, all of those would show your ketones. And starvation, strenuous exercise. Like I said, Barb's going to get into the respiratory and metabolic acidosis, alkalosis. And we'll go, levodopa was an interesting one. Let's put levodopa as a false increase. It is a medicine most of the time they use for Parkinson's disease, which, is something that uncontrollable nerve processes where you start shaking, or like our poor vice president has the starts of it. And in our meetings, his hand now, we had a lady that her head, always. And then Michael, I don't know, are you guys, any of you know Michael J. Fox? He's more my age, but he's had it probably 10 years now, and that was what he had. So levodopa is one of the medicines they can use to treat Parkinson's. They said it in conjunction with a medication that began with a C. So put levodopa as false positive. And what is gonna happen, you know, when it's sat too long at room temp for ketones.
Evaporates.
They're volatile, they evaporate. So put urine sat too long. And you already know the confirmatory test, right?
ACE test.
Okay, blood, you gotta be aware, this is gonna be a little bit more on the confirmatory test, but you have to be aware, how do you know it's blood fresh or intact, or hemoglobin, or myoglobin? Okay, the first clue is gonna be a cloudy red. And I'm just gonna call it a red urine on my test if I'm saying there's blood in it. These two are gonna be a clear red. Why do you think they would be clear? Just based on what you know about hemolysis from hematology, and when you look at a specimen that's been hemolyzed, how do you know you would think it's hemoglobin or myoglobin and not fresh? Because it breaks up the red cell. So you're not gonna have any cells in when we spin it, in the supernatant or anything. Remember, red cells, when they're intact, they're gonna be all without, okay? So this is a big clue, and on registry they do this too. So if you see a clear red, you're not worried about fresh red cells when you get a positive dipstick on the blood. You're thinking myoglobin or hemoglobin. So we're gonna have two different confirmatory tests because of that, depending on which one you get. Overall, if you get fresh red blood cells, that is, and we'll talk about it when we get a false positive to that screen, you're gonna think some kind of trauma to either the kidney or the urinary system. So let's just go with trauma to the kidney as our example of pathology for me. Okay, this is fresh red. So maybe on blood,
Well, is it the reagent?
Oh,
The reaction.
we're gonna put peroxidase, sorry. That's why I didn't wanna put it with the glucose. We're gonna keep that for blood. And I'm trying to make them one-word terms for you to remember.
Alright, so
And the
that's
test
one.
won't be till Thursday, so we'll have time to review on Wednesday, okay?
So you want one fresh blood, one.
Yes, or put intact, whatever. Do you guys understand what an intact is? That it's a fresh red cell's not destroyed? I don't know, whatever term you guys would understand better. Does fresh, is that better than, I'm just asking you as students.
So just
Either way.
fresh.
Because I think your dipstick says intact, I think. Just put fresh and then put beneath it, put heme, HGB, and myo. Myo will be your myoglobin. They're together. Okay, so fresh, we're gonna go with some kind of trauma to the kidney. An example, if you had a kidney stone, you're gonna have some fresh blood. If you're trying to avoid that kidney it is either wedged in your ureter or someplace, you're gonna have blood in your urine. That's fresh. But we'll just go with kidney, trauma to the kidney for that. On the hemoglobin, you can put hemolytic anemia, so put HEM period anemia. And then myo, put muscle trauma. That might be like a car accident. You might have some myoglobin, okay? So this is a good, I thought this chart was kind of good because it'll show you renal calculi, trauma. These are all two different kidney diseases we'll get into. Hemoglobin, a transfusion reaction in blood bank you'll learn about. Hemolytic anemia, as you learned about in hematology. And muscular trauma for myoglobin, okay? So we'll just go with trauma to the kidney, we'll go with hemolytic anemia, and we'll go with muscle trauma. But you have to be aware to explain to the floor, if you have a large blood and you report out hardly any red cells, you better know that you can say, hey, they can't be fresh. They have to be either hemoglobin or myoglobin. That's why we saw nothing under the microscope. These two, you're not gonna see red cells under the microscope, so you might wanna put that. Because I always worried, whenever I had a lot of blood on my dipstick, and I was reporting 0 to 2 red cells under high power field, I always said, I hope they realize that could be hemoglobin or myoglobin, and they're not gonna say, wait a minute, you said there was large blood and you didn't report any. It's valid, okay? So that'd be a good place to write it on this chart. So here, you're gonna say, many red cells under the microscope. Here, you might have 0 to few, not many at all. False negative, we're gonna go ahead with the ascorbic acid. And I wanna use the most common false positive is gonna be a menstruating female. We're gonna go with that one, because that is something you will see. A bloody or a dark yellow-brown because it started breaking down and it was the person on their period. Now, you know on the confirmatory test, if it's fresh blood, you're going to do the microscope as your confirming test. If it's hemoglobin or myoglobin, there's a test called ammonium sulfate. And you got to know this for your registry. You need to know how you can distinguish. What they'll do is add this powder, ammonium sulfate, to the urine, and then they let it sit, and then they centrifuge it after like 10 minutes, and then the hemoglobin should be all out into the reagent at the bottom after you centrifuge it. The myoglobin, if it's present, will still give positive blood on the dipstick. So if after you add the powder of ammonium sulfate, you let it sit, it gets a chance to absorb out the hemoglobin if it's there, and you centrifuge it, if it's still positive, you know it wasn't hemoglobin, it was myoglobin. But if you add the ammonium sulfate, and then you centrifuge it and you put the dipstick in the supernate and it's negative, you knew the hemoglobin was taken out by the ammonium sulfate. I don't care if you know that part. This is the part you have to know. To confirm hemoglobin or myoglobin, it's the ammonium sulfate. It's not the microscope. Okay? Bilirubin. It's called the diazo reaction. Just diazo. D-I-A-Z-O. And it is associated with two things. And I put it in here, and then I also put a screenshot from the book. What I want you to know, bilirubin, and I think I'll explain it when we get to the chart I have on. Because I think my old edition is better. I think I put both charts on, so we'll put it on when we get there. So just remember, bilirubin is a breakdown product of hemoglobin. Normally what happens, it gets into the liver and it becomes made water soluble. And most of it then gets converted to urobilinogen in the stool and is excreted that way, and then a little bit of urobilinogen recycles and goes out through the kidney. Okay? So normally, bilirubin shouldn't be present at all in your urine because it would have already been converted to urobilinogen by its normal process through the liver and out through the feces. So keep that in mind. If there's liver disease, we're going to usually have both positive, bili and urobilinogen. The only time you should definitely get all bilirubin and not urobilinogen is if it never gets conjugated because there's a blockage like a gallbladder, a gall duct obstruction. Okay, so my bilirubin gets to the liver, it's going to go try to the gallbladder, and there's an obstruction. That bilirubin doesn't get converted to urobilinogen, and you have too much excess. Some of it spills out into the urine, some of it gets into your blood. What color do you turn? The yellow. You get jaundiced. That's the babies. They can't process all their bilirubin. So what you need to know, I'm going to have you know, the main one is bile duct obstruction. is gonna be our big one. So I would circle this one, that it's totally only bilirubin is elevated and urobilinogen is not elevated.
And
It's
how does
normal.
that work? If, like, 'cause, like, I don't have a gallbladder. So how does that work if the gallbladder is what turns it to urobilinogen?
So there must be something that compensates, because you don't walk around with bilirubin backing up and getting jaundice. So I don't know what compensates for that, because when it's obstructed, and we'll put on some things and we'll see if there's a way that it goes around. So let's look at the charts. So the bilirubin, so there's other bile ducts besides the main one going into the gallbladder. It normally gets conjugated, made water soluble, becomes urobilinogen, and goes out through your feces. Okay? Then some of urobilinogen recirculates. Do we have a negative urobilinogen, or what do we have when we do our urine dipsticks? 0.2 or 1.0. So you always have a little bit of that, but a negative bilirubin. So there must be other bile ducts that can be blocked besides the one leading to the gallbladder. Okay, the chart, this is another way it shows. Hemoglobin breaks down into the protoporphyrin, which breaks down into the bilirubin. It becomes conjugated. Most of it becomes urobilinogen into urobilin and out the feces. That's the majority of it. So you never see bilirubin going back to the kidney if it's processed normally. It becomes urobilinogen, then urobilin in the feces, and out is your stool. That's why you have negative in your urine. If there's a problem, sometimes in liver disease there's a problem and both of them become elevated. But the ones I want you to know for the test is when it's truly either only bilirubin elevated or only urobilinogen elevated. So the one you got to know for the test is when there's a bile duct obstruction and it never gets to be conjugated and go out through as urobilinogen. It backs up everywhere. Some of it spills into the urine. It goes excessive levels in the bloodstream. You become jaundiced, okay, on an obstruction. Okay, that's what you're going to have to know for me for the test. So let's go, and this is what I want you to circle. I want you to know the ones where it's only bilirubin or it's only urobilinogen. So let's go on the one that it's only urobilinogen. I'm going to just back up a minute, okay? What if I have hemolytic anemia? Am I going to have a ton of bilirubin? The red cells are being lysed, right? So I got a ton of hemoglobin, a ton of bilirubin that has to get conjugated. Who becomes elevated when it's a hemolytic anemia? Is the urobilinogen. You form so much urobilinogen that some of it goes out as the feces, but remember, urobilinogen, once it recirculates, and a small amount goes out in the kidney. So, you have to know, the two you have to know on these two, the bottom one, hemolytic disease, when the red cells are being destroyed, goes with high levels of urobilinogen. So all of your hemolytic anemias in hematology, that could be one of their test results that are elevated. They would show a very high urobilinogen, maybe 4, maybe 8 on their dipstick. And this is something we'll discuss again next week, you guys. This won't be the only time we talk about it. But for the test, you got to know this one and the top one, because they can both be positive with your liver damage. So bilirubin, we already know what a false negative. You should be able to tell me that. Exposure to light. And then a false positive, just a highly pigmented urine. And you know the confirmatory test too. And then the urobilinogen is the Ehrlich reaction. So all you got to put under the reaction is Ehrlich. So you're still going okay on the sheet, huh? Be great if we could get it on one. Then I wouldn't have to worry about doing double-sided. EHRLICH. So diazo bilirubin. And when we get together again on Tuesday, we'll practice them So we'll practice it Tuesday and Wednesday before we have the test. So the airless reaction, we already said in hemolytic anemias, it's going to be very elevated. So you got the red cells get broken down into hemoglobin. Hemoglobin gets broken down into the protoporphyrin ring. Protoporphyrin ring gets broken down into bilirubin. All that bilirubin gets conjugated and all of it goes out as urobilinogen, and not all of it goes in the feces, a lot more backs up into the kidney. So you're going to have a higher level than just the 0.2 and the 1. So those are the 2 disease states for the test you got to know. Bile obstruction for high bilirubin only, and hemolytic anemia for high urobilinogen. And this is just another chart from Price-Strassinger. And circle the bottom one. That's what I'm going to have you know for the test. Hemolytic. That way you have it in both places, on the chart and in the PowerPoint. And a false positive, we're going to say porphobilinogen. In the protoporphyrin ring formation, there's coproporphobilinogen, uroporphobilinogen, porphobilinogen. So there is a test. That's a confirming test we're going to put down on the board. And the most common one you have to distinguish from urobilinogen is porphobilinogen. A false negative, just put urine sat too long. Improperly preserved, just put urine sat too long. They should have just put it in the refrigerator. So, the confirming test, you're going to put 2 things down. And I have a picture of the Watson-Schwartz in the PowerPoint we'll get to. You're going to put the Watson-Schwartz, W-A-T-S-O-N, and then S-C-H-W-A-R-T-Z, and it will detect the presence of either uro or porpho. So put behind, if you can fit it in underneath it, uro or porpho. Uro stands for urobilinogen. Porpho stands for porphobilinogen. And then I'll show you a picture how they detect it from this Watson-Schwartz. There's another test I don't have on here, but that I want you to know is called the HESH. So on that, with that same one, Patricia, put HESH, and it detects porpho only. So, if I ask and on the registry too, if I asked a question, which confirmatory test detects both uro and porphobilinogen, it would be the Watson-Schwartz. If I asked which test would the doctor order if they only wanted porphobilinogen detected, it would be the HESH. And I've seen both of them on registry questions, Watson-Schwartz and HESH. And I have a picture that's coming up that I'll show you. We're almost done. Nitrites, it's the Grease reaction. It must be who discovered it. G-R-I-E-S-S. And it's for UTIs. And tell me, you know what causes a false negative. You tell me. It's the nitrite that turns pink because of what type of bacteria? What converts nitrates to nitrite? Gram negative. So a false positive, that's cystitis, the same as UTI. A false negative would be to a gram positive bacteria. If I have Enterococcus faecalis, you'll learn in micro, it's a gram positive cocci. It causes bad UTIs. I would have a negative nitrite. So a gram positive bacteria gives you a false positive. It still has a bacterial infection. And we will say false positive, urine sat too long. You took the bacteria you had, let it sit there for 3 hours while you didn't want to put it in the refrigerator, and that bacteria multiplied. So it's not a true result if you get positive bacteria when it's sat over the hour. Confirm it with a microscope.
So gram positive is a false positive?
Nope.
No, negative.
because they don't convert nitrates to nitrite, so the pad will not turn pink. So if my UTI is not caused by E. coli or one of the gram negatives, I'm not going to turn that pad pink. It'll stay whatever yellow. That's a really good one for the test and for the registry. You got to know that. First morning specimen we know is the best for anything. Leukocyte esterase. I'm not going to have you put leukocyte. I just want you to put esterase, because then you'll know it. Well, that's okay, but I'm only going to underline the esterase because that's all I'm going to put on the test. It only detects these esterases in granulocytes, which would be any of your neutrophil series, not the lymphocytes or monocytes if they're present. So this will only, but usually if it's a bacterial infection, what increases? The neutrophils.
So for the reaction, you want me to put?
I want you to put the esterase.
Okay.
That's the reaction. And then we're going to say UTI as the disease. And we're going to put false positive, detergent. They didn't rinse the container well enough. And we're going to put false negative, ascorbic acid. So anytime I can, I'll try to use ones that are the same. Because then if you forget, you at least can go for one of those two and maybe you'll get it right. So not cleaning. So when there's detergent, they didn't clean it well enough. And ascorbic acid, remember that's vitamin C.
Microscope again?
Microscope. And remember, a bacterial infection is associated with neutrophils. Okay, and this one, I'm only going to have, on specific gravity, I'll see, it's hard to understand what they mean by the pKa, but I'll read it and see. All I want you to know, on the dipstick, write this, pKa just of the polyelectrolyte. Put pKa, polyelectrolyte as the reaction, pKa, and this is what it says. And then we'll be done. It says the reagent strip is based on the change in pKa, which is the dissociation constant of a polyelectrolyte in an alkaline medium. The polyelectrolyte ionizes, releasing hydrogen ions in proportion to the number of ions in the solution. The higher the concentration, the more hydrogen ions are released, thus lowering the pH. All I want you to know is it's the pKa polyelectrolyte. And we're not, specific gravity, I think we're going to put low with diabetes insipidus. So if that helps to put DI or diabetes, if you want to write it out, that's fine. And high would be diabetes mellitus. So we'll just keep that. And we will increase sources of air if a false positive is if there's excess protein in the, and an alkaline urine will give a false negative. So high levels of protein will give a falsely elevated. An alkaline pH greater than 7 would give a false negative. And I would circle this last bullet point. Osmolality is a better indicator because it measures number of particles, not weight. Circle that. If I ask why is osmolality better than specific gravity, that's what you want to tell me. It only measures number, whereas specific gravity measures number and weight.
Okay, what do you want me to put the confirmatory?
NA. And that'll be good. Let me go copy it. Let me see. So here's just, let me show you the Watson, the picture of it. Here's just confirmatory test in a nutshell. So you kind of have one slide that kind of reviews it. This is showing you the Clinitest. And so the pass-through would go to here and then come back to one of these. And then the Watson-Schwartz, this is just showing acid test. And then this was showing the icto test that we didn't have. The urine forms a dark color around the tablet. And then This is the SSA test. You would have a set of standards that would show the turbidity, and you would just match with, put whatever it matched. So if your urine looked like this, you would report SSA as 3+. If your urine looked like this one, you would report it looked like 1+. That way you kind of understand how the Roberts is done and how the SSA is done. I've never done the SSA, our lab always used Roberts. And the Schwartz test, they use chloroform and butanol. And this is just the patient's urine. And if it's urobilinogen, the chloroform layer and the butanol layer turns red. You don't have to know this for the test, you just got to know it's Watson-Schwartz. If I have excess porphobilinogen, the chloroform and butanol layers are yellow. So this is the Watson-Schwartz test. That's all you got to know for me is what's the name. And then the Hesch test would only detect for porphobilinogen. It wouldn't be able to detect both. So this one is nice because it gives the doctor an idea about either one. Okay, I'll have everything to you by tomorrow if I don't have it today. Let me go copy this real quick. And then you'll have this and the charts on your PowerPoint.
I'm sure that helps a little bit. It's an apartment. It looks probably exactly like my brother's, who lives in the same apartment complex in a 2-bedroom apartment.
We have different furniture, so ours looks nice. It could be flipped. It could be flipped. Different carpet. Different colored cabinets.
The latest.
Does he have a,
Kitchen on the left, right?
yes. Does he have medicine cabinets?
I don't know. I try not to go into his apartment. I can't tell you the last time I went into his apartment.
Well, he does have the same as me, though. He's got dog hair everywhere, I'm sure
Yeah.
of it. I'm sure of it. Oh my god, when we moved the furniture, I just like went to the top and I got this big, like, I have a new dog. A new dog was born.
Thanks for letting me complete it, you guys, because we got to keep on track. I appreciate it. Here you go. So Tuesday, remember, Barb and I are switching. She's 8 to noon, and I'm at noon to 2 because she wants to give you your test at 8. Oh, we might have to